Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined today by my D1 Baseball colleague, Patrick Ebert. Does such a fantastic job covering the Midwest at large with some other little odds and ends thrown in from time to time. He and Burt Granger do a fabulous job up in that part of the country, doing really wide-ranging coverage. And part of that for Patrick is covering the Northwoods League. I don't think anybody is covering the Northwoods League as extensively as Patrick does. And so today we're going to talk about SEC players who shined and that he wrote about in the Northwoods League. To really give you an idea of some players who are a little bit underneath the surface. We're going to go through some names today that maybe you've not heard of that have a chance to pop a little bit when they get back to campus and get ready for the 2025 season. So we'll jump into all that in just a second. But first, I have to let you know that this episode of Highway to Hoover and every episode of Highway to Hoover is brought to you by Pitch Logic, the system used by players, coaches, scouts, and instructors at all levels of play, from youth leagues to the big leagues. The easy-to-use and affordable technology makes the platform accessible to every player at every level. All the metrics and features used at the highest level. See pitchlogic.com for more information. All right, Patrick, first off, I appreciate you joining us. I know it's been a busy couple of weeks for you between the Northwoods ending. You've got, school starting for the kids and all this kind of stuff. So I appreciate you carving out a little bit of time for us today on Highway to Hoover.
Yeah, of course. And, even, the guys let me out of my little Midwest niche, and I got out to the Cape this summer for the first time ever. So I got to see a summer collegiate league in action other than the Northwoods League. So that was a lot of fun, but appreciate you having me on, Joe. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Actually, maybe I knew that at some point, but didn't realize. I knew you were on the Cape, but I don't think I realized it was maybe I forgot that it was your first ever time out there. What was your reaction to that? I mean, what did you find about the Cape that you enjoyed?
Yeah, obviously it's such a different atmosphere. It's so community based. The Northwoods League it's a business, and I'm not going to get into, what that means, good and bad, but, they're trying to make money. They're trying to put butts in the seats, and they're charging for tickets. They're charging concessions. And you have games in Madison that pack in, like 6,000 people. In fact, that's what they pull in every night. And I've never seen a summer collegiate atmosphere like that. But then I find myself in like Chatham, and like the ocean is like right over my shoulder. And you just have this great community feel. I didn't pay anything to get into the field area. You can't even call it a ballpark. And more than anything, I mean, and I'm not trying to take away from the talent in the Northwoods, but everyone on the Cape is like really good, like a legitimate Division I baseball prospect. And like just looking from a lineup from top to bottom, and you recognize the names almost instantly. Every arm that was coming in from the bullpen was thrown in the low 90s at least. Saw a few guys throw 98 while there. And you just don't see that in the Northwoods or any other summer collegiate league. So it was quite eye-opening. And now I want to try to go back every year. So that's how positive an impression it was. So.
Yeah, I my first time in the Cape was last summer, so the summer of 2023, and I went out there thinking, I've heard so much about this league, like how I've been to a lot of places to watch baseball games. How cool can this really be, right? And then you go out there and you're like, oh, okay, I get it. Like, yeah. I understand.
Yeah, right.
And I'll echo everything you say. Like, it's super relaxed, it's super laid back, which is not the same as feeling low stakes, because you mentioned Madison and the Northwoods getting 6,000. The Cape is a little bit different, but it's not unheard of for several thousand folks to just show up. But it's mostly there's some bleachers, but it's mostly folks in, especially in some stadiums, lawn chairs, blankets, sitting up against the chain link fence. Like it is very community centered, community oriented, and you can just feel that in a lot of positive ways. Now, sometimes you do wish for things that were, maybe a little more professionalized in some ways for what you and I are doing, right? Mm-hmm. There's no stat broadcast or, it was better this year because they have partnership with MLB on the website. But, you have to find the person running the track, man. It's all that stuff that's a little bit easier to do during the spring is tougher on the Cape because it's, small time. And I mean that in the best way, not the negative connotation there. But anyway, yeah, I echo all that. Like a really, really good time on the Cape. For me, it's if you're just a a baseball fan. Like, to me,
Mhm.
because it's inexpensive. Now, being on the Cape, it can be expensive. I'm not going to lie to you about that. But, the actual activity of going to the games, it's inexpensive. It's pleasant. If you're going to do a beach vacation with family anyway, and you love baseball, to me, it's like a no-brainer to do this. And depending on where you go, some of these games start like 5. I mean, games
Yeah.
are done by 7:30. Like, you can go have a later dinner. You can go back out on the beach for an hour for a sunset walk. Like you're not spending all night at the ballpark, which is great.
Yeah, and it's baseball kind of like at its fundamental finest, I'd say. And to your point, like I can envision taking my family there and making a vacation out of it, even if they didn't join me at the field. I mean, really, my only gripe is that every Cape team had like way too many interns like huddled right around behind home plate, and like when you mentioned about what we do for a living, like that's my gold mine. And so, like, if I could take all those people and just like spread them and just be like, all right, get out of the way, let me do my job here and focus on the players on the field. So,
Yeah. 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 Definitely agree there. Like, having to kind of fight through all that. Yeah. It can be a little much, but yeah, positive marks all around generally. Let's talk
absolutely.
a little. Let's talk a little bit about the Northwoods, Patrick. Again, we're
Mm-hmm.
going to talk some SEC players today, also some general Northwoods stuff. I actually wanted to start here to kind of set the table for listeners who maybe aren't as familiar with the Northwoods, and know it as like maybe don't have the respect for the league that I think it deserves in some cases. So sure, it's not the Cape in terms of the talent from top to bottom, but anybody who doubts that this can be a jumping off point for players should look no further than Charlie Condon. The first place I had ever heard Charlie Condon's name was in a piece you wrote in the summer of 2022 that
Mm-hmm.
said, hey, look, this is a guy that we should be looking out for. He's going off here in the Northwoods. He looks like, not just maybe the best player out here, but like could be one of the best players in the country. And lo and behold, we find out what he is. So tell me a little bit about what you remember about Charlie Condon in that summer, and to what degree did you see coming what he ended up being at Georgia?
Yeah, yeah. It was really interesting. He showed up at the All-Star game, which was held in Wisconsin Rapids, which is right in the center of Wisconsin. And it's kind of like Americana at its finest, like small town, like bunting in the outfield, like everything, just a beautiful summer day. And, he came out and he had like a 2 home run, 3 RBI game. And just, when he hit these home runs, he absolutely just destroyed them. And they were those moments that you're watching where you're literally like your eyes get a little wider and you just want to find out more about this player. I instantly, because there's like zero media contact in the Northwoods League. Like you really have to be creative in how you contact these players. And thankfully, with the advent of social media, like I immediately hopped on, found him, followed him, he followed me back, sent him a message saying, "Hey, can you talk?" We ended up talking on the phone, and just had a brief conversation, wrote a brief story about him just to kind of get into his mind a little bit. But here's a young man, like he was very eager to get better because obviously his freshman year, his true freshman year at Georgia, he didn't play. So he was looking for playing time opportunities. That's exactly what you get in the Northwoods League. The regular season is 72 games long. So it starts right after Memorial Day and it ended, like a week and a half ago. So it's a really long season. You can get up to like 200 at bats if you stay that long. I've seen pitchers get up to like 80 innings over the summer. So you can make up for a lot of lost time, whether it's injury or a lack of playing time. And just Condon, because then Condon also was selected to the league's like showcase game that was probably 2 to 3 weeks after that. And having worked in the showcase industry in high school, I know sometimes players don't always show the best in like a showcase setting. And Condon didn't. Like he didn't look as good that day. He wasn't the type of guy that you showed up for batting practice and he instantly just wowed you. He was the type of guy that when the game was going on is what you call kind of like a tournament player. He really stepped forward and he enjoyed such a huge summer. I think his summer ended shortly after that showcase game, and he headed back to Georgia to get ready for their fall ball. But I mean, at the time, you could see it. He was like 6'3", 200, had such a great natural short swing despite being so so long with such long levers and really got an excellent leverage. Then the power was evident and his strength and his swing and all those different things. So, there's no way I could have forecasted him becoming the player that he was, or even the third overall pick. But it was obvious this was a guy that was going to explode once spring hit at Georgia, and he just took it to a whole nother level.
Yeah, you mentioned the length of the summer out there, and one of the critiques of the Northwoods that I think you and I agree with is just the length of it, and it really can be a gauntlet. But the positive spin of that is that, to your point, like I just looked up on Baseball Reference, 289 plate appearances for Charlie Condon that summer.
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah.
And so just like for a kid who didn't play that his freshman year, like that's exactly what he needed, just to get out there and figure things out a little bit. And so, yeah, that's kind of I think that's a good jumping off point for our discussion today, because a lot of these guys we're going to mention here, like that's kind of what they needed, either because they're getting acclimated to this level of college baseball or because they just didn't play a ton last year. So let's actually use that as the jumping off point to talk about a couple Kentucky guys you wrote about. And I should mention, I pulled this, Patrick and I are working off a list of players that I pulled, all of whom most of whom I should say, he wrote about extensively in his series of Northwoods League notebooks, which I would recommend if you're interested in more information, you go back and take a look at. But two Kentucky players, Ethan Hindle and Griffin Cameron, both intriguing to me from the big picture standpoint of, I don't know if I don't know if you've noticed, but Kentucky's roster gonna look a lot different in 2025. I mean, the greatest team of all in program history in 2024. They absolutely maximized that roster, but now they're kind of starting over. So there's a lot of opportunity on the position player side, and both of those guys were guys that I heard going into last fall. Both were freshmen going into the 2024 season. Hindle and Cameron were guys that, when I talked to the coaching staff or talked to people around the program, they were like, we don't have a lot of opportunity because we're such a veteran team, but those are two guys that could have an impact. Now, ultimately, neither of them really did because of the veteran nature of that roster, but 2025 is going to be a different deal. So start with whomever you would like there, Patrick, but tell us about Ethan Hindle and Griffin Cameron and their summers in the Northwoods.
Yeah, I'll start with Hindle just because he is a Wisconsin native, and I had the chance to see him numerous times, just being a Wisconsin resident myself. And I also cover high school baseball for in a freelance capacity and also for different outlets. So I was well familiar with Hindle before he got to Kentucky, and really the transformation that I've seen since he's been in college. When I had the chance to speak with him in person a few weeks ago, he's such a physical young player, and you could tell that he's continuing to get bigger. And it's not even that he's like this weight room monster. I mean, obviously all student athletes have to be, very focused in the weight room to get bigger, faster, and stronger. But he's just maturing naturally to be a big, strong, physical young man. And, he came to college probably as like a shortstop, second baseman, whereas now he's probably viewed more as a third baseman, second baseman, just given that size and the power potential. And his second game in the Northwoods League, I want to say he hit like 2 home runs or a home run and a double. And his third game, he added like 4 or 5 more RBIs, and he just really made an instant impact. And it was interesting speaking with him how he didn't necessarily have any set goals for the entire summer, but almost had a day-by-day goal where he'd almost wake up that day and be like, all right, I want to really focus on staying on top of the ball and hitting line drives, up the middle, or I really want to start working the ball to the opposite field. And one of his bigger focuses was his defense. He wanted to get a lot of time on the infield so he can make a contribution, a positive contribution for Kentucky. Because that was an area of I don't necessarily say a weakness, but when you don't play the field, you're not helping yourself. You're not getting better because you're lacking those defensive reps as well. So he was looking to get at bats. He was looking to get those defensive reps. He got both. He batted around 250. He hit, what did he hit? He hit like 5 home runs and 9 doubles. So he added some power. And, he didn't play for the greatest team in Lakeshore, but that's not really what summer collegiate ball is about. It was more about just getting that experience. And now heading back to Kentucky, I think they're getting a young man that, if he continues to hit, this is a guy that could hit, towards the middle of that lineup, maybe even right in the middle of that lineup. But certainly, if they're going to have success with a slightly younger roster this year, you mentioned the experience they have. Hindle's going to have to be a big part of that. So, and Griffin Cameron, I always get his main name mixed up. I want to call him Cameron Griffin, but it's Griffin Cameron, and he's
two first names.
Yeah, right. He's got two first names. He can flat out fly. He's the skinny kid. He's like 6'1", 180 or so, but real rail thing with long lanky limbs but he can fly. They call him Flash because he can absolutely fly. He stole over 40 bases. He only got caught like 2 or 3 times all summer. He got on base a ton. His swing is really geared to just getting the ball in play, almost like kind of like that slap and dash style, where your body is rotating with your swing. So you're putting yourself already towards first base when you're running. And he doesn't really need any other kind of advantage when it comes to his speed because he's going to outrun a lot of infield hits to begin with. And once he gets on, then you got to be careful. And he walks a lot. He got hit by some pitches too. Not a lot of power to his swing. And then that speed translates so well to center field too. So, I mean, he could just track balls down to both gaps really well. Exciting young combination of players playing on the same team. Griffin actually lived with Hindle's family because Hindle's from Wisconsin. So the two of them were roommates over the summer, and I found that interesting. So they continued to bond, over the course of the summer. They will continue to bond when they return to Lexington. Yeah, those are two young men that I think are going to be a much bigger part of Kentucky's success this coming year.
A really interesting summer for Griffin Cameron. I mean, hit 374, 460 on base. To your point, doesn't strike out a ton. Like a guy who's just going to prioritize putting the ball in play. And he strikes me as at a like maybe like an elevated version of what like Ty Crittenberger gave them last year at a bare minimum, which is like can really go get it in center field, late game pinch runner. I think can be more than that. Like I'm not putting that ceiling on him, but like at a bare minimum, that speed is going to play to where he's going to have a role to play. Like it just seems it's too easy plug and play, just given how well he runs.
Yeah,
moving
agreed.
on to,
and I would just say the lack of power is something that could keep him from being a regular. I mean, because we've seen that power surge. It's not just at the big leagues. It's in college baseball too, and you want to have that more complete player. So if he is coming off the bench, to your point, he's going to do a lot of damage even in that role.
Yeah. Moving on to a guy on the mound, Landon Victorian, who little bit of a story there with his recruiting was originally an LSU recruit. He's from the state of Louisiana, now going to Oklahoma. It should be said part of that was due to an expulsion from his high school in Louisiana. Reportedly was involved in an incident where he pulled a knife on someone on the baseball staff, and there was a court proceedings to try to overturn the expulsion, but it was upheld. So like that probably explains part of just kind of the roller coaster of his recruiting process. However, there is really no doubting his ability. He's a very talented pitcher. So just from an on-field standpoint, Patrick, give us an idea of the pitcher that Landon Victorian is going to Oklahoma.
Yeah, and I appreciate it because actually I was unaware of that. I did not do my homework to see, what happened to him because I think, coming into the summer, him being an LSU recruit and then him leaving the summer as an Oklahoma recruit, I mean, that just doesn't happen. I mean, it doesn't matter the profile of the school. Like, it just doesn't happen. He's a high school senior. He hasn't pitched yet in college. But, yeah, I mean, he's young man's probably like 6'2", 6'3", like 170, 180 pounds. Super, super skinny. You can see so much projection with him. It's a live arm. The stuff's already good. It's like 90 to 93 with a low 80s changeup, a breaking ball that was in the upper 70s and right around 80 miles per hour. What was really impressive with him, because he stayed, I don't know, about a month to a month and a half, was the command. And he pitched like once a week, like on Sundays for the Green Bay team. And that's kind of what he was tasked to do. And he did really well against college hitters. And like he would have some games where the walks were up, but if you went back and you looked at his performance, it's not that his control was all over the place. And you really see this command package, in which he's able to command 3 pitches really well and he sequences well off them. So he has this advanced sense of timing and disruption, to change up the hitters, to basically shake them off their own rhythm. And for him to do that as a high school senior against college sophomores, juniors, and seniors, that's really impressive. Aside from how hard he throws. So, where he ends up with Oklahoma and his role, is going to have everything to do if he continues to show that. Because we've seen it so many times, Joe, where you have a freshman that can throw mid-90s, but they can't get on the mound because they don't know what they're doing with it. So I think he has a high probability of seeing more significant innings, even if it's out of the bullpen, even if it's as like a setup role or whatever role that he ends up getting. And it could be more than that. I don't know. He could have a much bigger role if he continues to improve that command and stuff package. So he's a player that really intrigues me. One more, with such a unique background that he has, both positive and negative. It'll be interesting to see how well he fares.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, a lot of projection there. That's kind of the takeaway I had as well, just in the video that I've seen of him. So intrigued to see what he with a coaching staff that knows their pitching, right? Skip Johnson, like that's his background. They have a long track record as a staff and him individually of taking kind of some moldable clay, if you will, and turning it into something. So that was a former LSU recruit. Now a current one, Tanner Reaves, originally an LSU recruit, ends up in junior college. Now bouncing back to LSU. Give us an idea of what to expect with him.
Yeah, his profile is somewhat similar to how I explained Griffin Cameron. He doesn't have that same type of game-changing speed, but it is a taller, more slender build with more of a rotational swing where he's looking to put the ball in play. And it's a flat level swing, where he's not looking to lift the ball. He's looking to hit the ball. He's a left-handed hitter, so he's looking to hit it, to left field to right field. He's trying to up the middle into the gaps. There is enough speed for him to stretch extra bases, although that's not like a huge strength, at least not to the level of Griffin Cameron. Very good eye at the plate, very disciplined, really shows he knows how to hit. He knows what he's looking for at the plate. The approach is there. No surprise, he put up good numbers at the JUCO level. The lack of power is something that's going to be a little more evident. I don't really see him hitting for a lot of power, but if he can be, a high average, high on base second baseman that plays steady defense, I think for LSU, I think there's obviously value in that. And obviously he hits left-handed, so that's another plus. Again, similar to when we were talking about Hindle and Cameron, even if he is a bench player, coming off and providing pinch hitting opportunities, a late defensive replacement, pinch runner, things like that. There's definite value there.
Yeah, I don't want to put words in his mouth necessarily, but I believe David Seifert, our colleague with D1 Baseball, liked him as a guy who maybe like a club could fall in love with a little bit. I mean, big time performer at a very good junior college program at Blinn. So, you could see it, if LSU is interested, certainly he's talented, right? And man, it's just, I don't need to tell you because you cover enough Midwest baseball, which has at the Division I level a lot of JUCO influence, just because there are a lot of good JUCO programs, Iowa Western, John A. Logan, et cetera, et cetera. JUCO prospects are just, sometimes they're kind of a coin flip. Guys that are big time performers at these good JUCO programs, you just never really know. But that being said, I think the profile of Tanner Reaves is one that you feel pretty confident should translate, because it's not just based on, hey, this is a big donkey who hit 40 home runs in junior college, right? It's a guy who puts the bat on the ball. He can run a little bit. He can play up the middle. And those things tend to translate a little bit better from JUCO to even the SEC.
Yeah, it's certainly not a grip it and rip it type of profile. Like he's going to the plate. He has a very mindful approach of what he's trying to accomplish, and type of guy that you throw on those tags, like, just kind of like a good professional hitter, a situational hitter, guys like that. The guy that you always want to put in the 2-hole in your lineup, be like, who can bat behind the runner and hit behind him so they can advance on the base paths. And Tanner Reaves is your guy if you like those kind of labels. So
yeah, I love talking to summer ball coaches, and it's clear sometimes they don't exactly know how to tell me what they're talking about. They're just like, he just knows how to hit. Kid knows how to hit.
Right.
Like that's which is
that's
just it's praise, but it's very vague praise because it's like hard to, he's not the toolsiest guy, but he's, interesting. Yeah. Let's go to Hudson Calhoun for Ole Miss. I mean, just dominant numbers in a relatively small sample, 6 starts for Kenosha. But he's interesting to me from the standpoint of anybody who's been paying attention knows that Ole Miss has had a heck of a time figuring out its pitching the last 2 seasons. So it does feel like a all hands on deck kind of situation to figure out some roles. And based on the summer that he's coming off of, you have to imagine that he's in a position to be able to earn a role for the Rebels in 2025.
Yeah, and I've really liked watching and talking to Calhoun because, I mean, first of all, talking to him, I talked to him before the game, super relaxed personality, like confident but not cocky, relaxed but not focused. Like he just had this aura of just like he knew he belonged there, and he was just doing his job, and he was doing what he needed to do, prepare for his game. He wasn't panicking. He had everything under control. He took the mound, and he had just a really unique repertoire in that, like, he had a 90 to 92 mile per hour 2-seamer, and then he had a 93 to 94 mile per hour 4-seamer. And you could really tell the difference because the 4-seamer, the kind of rode in, as it came, like it didn't adjust. And then the 2-seamer would kind of like had that running action or like the cutting action in, and it did a little of both depending on how he manipulated the pitch. And it really didn't vary from that velocity band. We're talking like a 1 to 2 velocity difference for each unique fastball that he threw. And then he also threw a breaking ball that was good, but he didn't even strike out a ton of guys. I mean, he struck out 7 in, 6 innings the game that I saw. But for the most part, his strikeouts were about the same as his innings pitched, because really what he was good at was using that fastball to get in on the hands of batters, and they would just pound the ball into the ground, and they would turn an easy ground out or pop it into the air for an easy fly out. He just wasn't allowing any type of hard contact. And from whenever he showed up in June to I think he lasted just after the 4th of July, I mean, he was just so proficient at what he did, and he was really efficient at what he did, and didn't allow many hits, didn't allow many runs, didn't record a ton of strikeouts, but didn't walk a lot of guys either. So you see guys like that and go into a place like Ole Miss, in SEC, this is better than anyone, Joe. Like there's such an emphasis, kind of like what I mentioned before about power, to be able to strike guys out. And so you wonder how Calhoun's role, how he's going to fit in, where he may be better as like a Sunday starter at first, or a midweek starter, or even maybe their setup guy at first, just to see if his stuff, if he's continuing to get guys out regularly. Because otherwise, like if batters start figuring him out, or his command isn't as sharp, or if he's leaving that 4-seamer up in the zone, he may pay for it. But I think he's going to do well, and I'm kind of rooting for him to do well, because I really enjoyed watching him pitch.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, 6'3", 6'4", maybe 195. Like it's a good body. Like it's really, to use the phrase, something to dream on. Like he could be a guy that, depending on what Ole Miss brings back in 2025, is just as interesting to the scouts as he is to the, as he is to the coaches at Ole Miss next year, just because there's projectability there. And sometimes those guys, it's, it just, maybe it takes getting an opportunity in a professional system. And sometimes it's those guys that haven't had a lot of opportunity, but they have a lot of those raw materials. So we'll see what Hudson Calhoun does in 2025.
Yeah, physically, just to jump in quick, he reminds me of what Aaron Nola was as like a freshman and sophomore at LSU, as compared to what he is now, like for the Phillies, where he's a much more physical pitcher. Because right now, Calhoun, he's got high waist, broad shoulders, but it's a very lean profile. But you can see after a few years of him continuing to work out and put that muscle on, that he could be a significantly different athlete.
Yeah. Good call there. One of the last guys on the Northwoods that I know caught your eye was RJ Hamilton at Vanderbilt. Another team that I think is looking for some answers. I think they've made very clear, they made some staff changes in the offseason. They made it very clear that the status quo is not going to be okay. I think that could also usher in a really competitive fall for Vanderbilt and early part of the spring when we flip the calendar. So everyone up to it, including RJ Hamilton, I think is going to be in the mix for various jobs. So tell us a little about what caught your eye with him.
Yeah, I mean, it's first the athleticism. He's, I think like 5'10", 5'11", 180, 190 pounds. When you talk about projectability, you're usually talking about pitchers. But, as far as projectability for a position player, that's certainly where he's at, because it's what you'd call just that quick twitch athleticism that really stands out. And he's got that bounce in his step when he takes the field. And even in the championship game, I wasn't there to see it for myself, but I watched the video online, and in extra innings, he caught a ball and about medium depth in left field, and he threw a runner out at third trying to score what would have been the winning run, which would have won the championship at the time. And he gunned the runner out, from left field, and that was such an impressive play. And it's not even like this runner was like this big slow, that plotter that couldn't get to home quick enough. It was that good of a throw that beat him. But, when you talk about his strengths, you're probably not going to talk about his arm in left field. You're going to be talking about the tools at the top of the order, because he has such a good, like, slashing line drive swing with some gap power. And, he had only one home run on the summer, but it's the one clip that I shared, on Twitter. And, he crushed it. He crushed it to straightaway center field. So there is power in the swing. And, another guy that stole, similar to Griffin Cameron, where he stole over 40 bases and was only caught a handful of times. So got on base overall at a very high clip, drew his walks, got hit by pitch, made contact, did all those things that you'd like to see in somewhat of a making up for a lost spring. Because I don't know what his injury was. My understanding was he had an injury as a freshman at Vanderbilt and was making up for that lost time, and did so just, fantastic. Did a fantastic job making up for that lost time. You have to believe, like, guys like him and RJ Austin, who's like another one of these dynamic athletes that Vanderbilt have, who I saw when I was out on the Cape. Like, you have to figure those two guys are guys that the Commodores are really hoping can click for them, because that's the type of dynamic presence that it just doesn't seem like they've had now for a couple years.
Yeah, RJ Hamilton strikes me as having a lot of similarities to another RJ Austin at Vanderbilt, where RJ Austin's a little bigger, physically speaking, but like Hamilton can run, he could play a few different positions. Like, he's going to be maybe the best athlete on the field every time he steps on the field, right? Yep. Like that kind of guy. And Vanderbilt has a long history of having a lot of success with those kind of guys. So I'm excited to see RJ Hamilton finally get a shot to show us what he can do.
I think Hamilton was also a real high football recruit too. So, I mean, shows you it's like that multi-sport type of athleticism that really stands out.
Lucas Ferris at Georgia, I think one of the genius things about the way Georgia recruited out of the portal last year was, okay, yes, they took some older guys, and that was a big part of them getting to a super regional, but they also took some guys that felt like more long-term plays. And Lucas Ferris is maybe one of those guys. He came over after his freshman year at Western Kentucky, where he put up good numbers, just never really found a role for himself with the Bulldogs. But obviously 2025 could be a little bit different. So give us a feel for what you saw from him in the Northwoods League.
Yeah, Ferris is one of those guys where you really have to use kind of like your crystal ball to figure out. And because I want to say he was like 0 for 3 with a pair of strikeouts the game that I saw. So you can't just scout from the box score but like he's 6'5", 225, right-handed hitter. I mean, he definitely looks the part, but just his approach in the batter's box, he was taking such competitive at bats and swings. Like, you could really see that he's not far away from that entire package kind of exploding. And you're not to put an unfair comparison to Charlie Condon on him, because he certainly did not enjoy that type of summer. But like, that's kind of where he is, like, as far as being on the cusp of kind of having that switch just turn on for him, and all of a sudden just figuring it out. You just feel like he's really close to being at that point. And I was a day away from him having like a pair of back-to-back like 2-hit games with like a couple doubles or something like that. So it just shows you, like, you just have to also be patient with these players too as you follow them. So he's a guy I would really be excited to see how he does this fall and how he does not only for himself, but to earn a spot on the team and whether or not he does. Because if those pieces come together for him, I mean, we're talking about a serious power prospect. I mean, the size alone gives it away, but you can see it in his swing. You can see it in his approach. He's building to that. He's not quite there yet, but it's close.
Yeah, 6'5", 227. That is a large young man.
Yes, it is. Yep.
That's which you and I, under 6 feet for you and I. So we're looking up at someone like him. There's no doubt about that.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I don't have it. No.
I was first of all, I was going to say that I meant to mention this when we talked about Charlie Condon. I ran into his Charlie Condon's dad at Foley Field one time last season when I was there covering Georgia, and Charlie Condon's a tall guy. Dad might be taller. That definitely, yeah. And mom was tall too, no surprise. But but dad was a tall individual. So, but I thought of that because Charlie Condon's like probably the guy last year I interviewed who made me feel the shortest. Just having to reach really high up with my phone to talk to him.
Yeah.
And then I think, and this goes to show that, like, as I get a little off on a tangent here, I think early on I kind of noticed this as something that at first I thought was a coincidence, but then, I interviewed him, because I was at Georgia for the regional and a lot of different things, fall games. I interviewed him probably 3 or 4 times in person over the last calendar year. And after the first couple of times, he would do a thing where he would go into the dugout and step up on the first step and lean on the rail so that we were more like on an eye to eye level. And the more I hear about him being like, just a really thoughtful person, like, I have to wonder if that was not an accident, that he was like, let me like get on a level to where I'm not looking down at him and we're actually talking more eye to eye. Who knows? But I did notice that.
I believe it, Joe. When I mentioned that I reached out to him to have that conversation with him, more than the baseball stuff, he was just such like a polite young man. And there was no sense of like arrogance. There was like no hint of like just ego or any of that stuff. Like he genuinely was there to get better, and it was more than just saying the right things at the right times. Because you get players like that who will kind of repeat and kind of do the Bull Durham, like where you gotta know your what was it called? You gotta know like the right things to say, and it wasn't like that. It wasn't a scripted way to talk. He was just very pleasant to speak to. So it would not surprise me if he did that to kind of make it for a more comfortable conversation for both of you.
Yeah. The last thing I want to ask you about is only kind of tangentially SEC related, and that's because Seaver Sheets, the son of Ben Sheets, started at Auburn as an infielder. Now he's back at his dad's alma mater, UL Monroe, which at the time was not called UL Monroe, or at least not early in his career. But now he's trying to make
Louisiana or whatever.
Yeah, Northwest Louisiana. I think that's right. Yeah. Now Seaver Sheets trying to make it as a pitcher. So obviously I assume he's pretty raw. Just given that, he at the very least took time off from pitching to focus on being an infielder. Tell us where he kind of, to your eye, where he is in that process, and I don't know, what can we expect in a pretty competitive Sun Belt. He's going into a league where, like, in order to get on the mound, you got to be good in the Sun Belt. That's a very good league. So what's kind of your prognosis for where he is as a pitcher?
Yeah, I was familiar with him, again, going back to just covering more showcase baseball in high school. Both he and his brother, Miller Sheets, were very good, very well-known commodities on the showcase circuit. Both were two-way players. Both were very accomplished two-way players, good hitters, good pitchers. And I remember even being impressed with the way Seaver, the older of the two brothers, pitched when he did take the mound. And actually their dad, Ben Sheets, who was a pitcher for the Brewers, the Braves, and the A's for, 12, 13 years. He ran that team that both of his boys played for. So it was a competitive team during a few years where there was some really good talent coming out of the state of Louisiana. So he obviously is not his dad pitching, like he was sitting 87 to 89 with his fastball. The breaking ball was more of a slurvy kind of slider, whereas his dad had that signature, over 12-6 curveball that would sit in the low 80s and just completely, just baffle opposing hitters. I live outside of Milwaukee. I saw Ben Sheets pitch a lot when he was in the big leagues. And Seaver Sheets is not that type of pitcher. But to your point, Joe, like that's not necessarily what Louisiana Monroe needs him to be. They need him to be, just a competent strike thrower, a guy that can change up his velocity at times to be good enough. I think he showed flashes of that. His first few outings were pretty solid. His summer was cut short. So obviously he still has a lot of things to work on. I think the command component at this point in time is more important for him than the actual stuff, because I think the stuff is good enough to get college hitters out, especially in the Sun Belt Conference. But yeah, I agree with you that it's a very fascinating story, and it's one when I saw him show up, when I saw his name on the roster, he was a guy I circled, and I knew like I want to talk to him. I want to meet him, because he's pitching in the same city that his dad pitched for. Seaver was born in Milwaukee. He's named after Tom Seaver. His younger brother Miller is actually named after Miller Park, which is what the Milwaukee Brewers Stadium used to be called. So there's a real connection with the Sheets family to the city of Milwaukee. And it was just a lot of fun to see him play here.
Yeah, 6 innings pitched in the spring for ULM. After the summer, getting a lot more innings. In the Northwoods, have to wonder if maybe he's a guy that takes a little bit of a step forward now that he has sea legs under him, as they would say. I miss Miller Park, by the way, Patrick. I know that the almighty dollar dictates that we change the names of stadiums, but like I miss Miller Park. I guess we still have Coors Field, right? Do we not? We have Busch Stadium. Like stadium is named after beers, like God intended. So I do miss Miller Park.
Agreed. Half the people here in the area still call it Miller Park, so you don't have to miss it too much because it's still referred to that, by myself included. So
yeah, I think there's just a few. It's like when they changed in LA, they changed the name of the Staples Center to something else, and it's like, well, nobody's ever gonna call it by its real name, or I still call the Mariners ballpark Safeco, which I don't think it's been Safeco for a long time. We choose what to call it based on whatever made the biggest impression.
Yeah, agreed. Then you're right. They should all be called after beer. So that's
right.
100% spot on.
Yeah, they should have gone from Miller to Leinenkugel if they wanted to be an honest-to-God Midwestern baseball outfit.
That's true. Leinenkugels, although, is owned by Miller, so I don't know if they would go to one of their sub-brands.
No,
that's more like Laverne and Shirley Milwaukee knowledge for you. So,
as only Patrick Ebert can deliver it. Also, as only Patrick Ebert could deliver it, a lot of information here on players in Northwoods League. So again, these are some guys that maybe, you haven't heard a lot about, but could be poised to take jumps based on getting just a lot of playing time in Northwoods League, and in some cases really, really excelling out there. So a lot of good information. Patrick, appreciate you taking some time and joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joe. It's a fun time as always.
That's going to do it for this edition of Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. Thank you to Pitch Logic for sponsoring this and every episode of the show. Thank you to Patrick again for joining us, and thank you, the listener, for listening.